I know many of you, and I hope to have the opportunity to meet all of you over the course of the next few days. For those I do not know, my name is Lisa Brown, and I am truly honored to be the Executive Director of the American Constitution Society. I knew that the ACS... I knew that the ACS convention was the place for progressive lawyers, law students, judges, and academics to see and be seen, but I knew we had really hit the big leagues when I learned that John Kerry had scheduled an event here at the hotel at the same time as our convention, just so that he could benefit from our aura. I also understand that President Bush was supposed to be here in this hotel last night. I think he's starting to get worried and wants to hear what we're up to. Don't worry, Mr. President, we're not planning in here scheming to amend the Constitution. We think it's just fine the way it is right now. Seriously, ACS has had a tremendous year, thanks to each and every one of you in this room. The American Constitution Society is a grassroots movement with tremendous momentum on both the local and national level. We now have over 100 student chapters all across the country, with some of our strongest in surprising states like Texas and Utah. We have more than doubled our lawyer chapters over the course of the past year, in addition to chapters in Washington, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and what did I skip on our first ones? And Chicago. Sorry, Chicago. We now have chapters in Boston, Cincinnati, Houston, Iowa, and New York, and additional chapters are in formation in Atlanta, Miami, Michigan, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Seattle. That's great. We've hosted hundreds of speakers addressing issues of critical interest, including Vice President Gore on civil liberties issues following September 11th, and Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton on judicial nominations and conservative efforts to suppress democratic debate. Our events are garnering ever greater media coverage, and perhaps most importantly, members of the press are increasingly calling us to get the other side's view on issues, thus giving progressive lawyers the opportunity to shape coverage of issues. Now, we even have our very own ACS pocket constitutions. Those of you who were at last year's convention will recall a moment when Judge Guido Calabresi noted that the Constitution that he was brandishing had been provided by the Cato Institute. Thanks to the tremendously generous support of Lawrence and Carolyn Tribe, Judge Calabresi can now pull out an ACS pocket constitution. Like the Cato copy, we too have included the Declaration of Independence as one of our key founding texts. But we then decided to include the Gettysburg Address rather than an essay on the meaning of the Constitution by conservative scholar Roger Pilon. Pilon, Lincoln. Lincoln, Pilon, you choose. Plus, thanks to Tom Moore, a member of the ACS Georgetown chapter, you can now go to the ACS website and download the Constitution onto your iPod. Our plans for the coming year are no less ambitious. In addition to expanding our membership chapters, we are embarking on some very exciting projects. We're starting on a long-term project working with constitutional scholars and hands-on practitioners to articulate a comprehensive, progressive vision of the Constitution. This will be the topic of next year's convention as well as a spring conference at Yale. We're also working with all of our chapters this fall to host programming on the importance of judicial nominations to the nature of the society in which we will live. And we're beginning to serve a much-desired clearinghouse function, connecting our members with other progressive organizations in need of their intellectual firepower and legal skills. This fall, for example, a number of members of the ACS network will work with Election Protection Know Your Rights, a coalition of over 80 nonprofits that are working to ensure that our election laws are respected so that poor and minority voters are not disenfranchised this November. No longer a startup organization, ACS is now a nationally recognized presence. With this stature comes greater responsibilities that are particularly acute at this moment in our nation's history. The future of our country, who we are and what we stand for, will be determined by how we respond to the issues that are facing our country today. Will our government treat those in its custody in a manner consistent with our Constitution, international law, and basic human decency? Will our federal government be able to exercise the powers granted to it by our founders to address national problems? Will we be sure that all people in America can aspire to the American dream because they begin life with equal opportunity for a quality education regardless of their race or economic circumstances? Hence the theme of this year's convention, Liberty and Equality in the 21st Century. We have brought together many of our country's leading thinkers to address these and other questions facing us today and to help us articulate a progressive America. I want to say a personal thank you to each of our terrific speakers for taking the time to join us and share your thoughts. A special heartfelt thank you goes to each of our incredible sponsors for making this convention and yesterday's student retreat possible, and for enabling us to provide scholarships to 110 students. Please join me in giving them. All of our sponsors are listed on signs by the entrance to this room and also in your convention programs, and we really are deeply appreciative. Our nation has spent much of the last few weeks celebrating the life of a president known for his optimistic view of America. But neither he nor his fellow conservatives have a monopoly on a positive view of America. Indeed, it is progressives who have always believed in a better tomorrow for all Americans and supported the means to make that promise a reality. It is the progressive vision that has led to the greatest advances in our nation's history, from the abolition of slavery to women's suffrage, from the demise of Jim Crow to expanded civil rights for people of color, women, people with disabilities, and the GLBT community. But that vision is under attack today by the conservative movement that dominates our federal government and our public discourse. We must work together to safeguard its gains and to ensure liberty and justice for all. In the words of Martin Luther King, the time is always right to do what is right. This is not an abstract debate. This is a debate that will shape the future of our legal system and thus our society. I hope you will each make this debate your own. Together, we can realize the true promise of our Constitution and the democracy it established. Before we hear from our terrific luncheon speaker, Congressman Lewis, who more than anyone I know has shown us what it really means to spend your life serving your country, I want to introduce Alan Jenkins. Alan is the director of the Human Rights Unit at the Ford Foundation, one of ACS's most generous supporters. Like Congressman Lewis, Alan has a long history of working for civil rights and racial justice. He served as editor-in-chief of the Harvard Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Law Review, clerked for Justice Harry Blackmun, worked as assistant counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and served as assistant to the U.S. Solicitor General before going to Ford. Alan is clearly someone who will continue to make America better for all people. Please welcome Alan Jenkins.
Thanks, Lisa, and good afternoon. First, they've asked me to let you know that the plenary on Brown versus Board of Education will take place immediately after this session, and I think, as you'll see, that's appropriate timing. It's a great honor and no small challenge to introduce our luncheon speaker, Congressman John Lewis. As we've been celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, we've seen that Brown has many legacies, and some are more obvious than others. There's the legacy of legal groundwork and strategic litigation by Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston, Robert Carter, and other legal giants. There's the social science legacy of scholars like John Hope Franklin, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who sought to make the law conform to the reality of the human condition. And there's the legacy of Chief Justice Earl Warren and a Supreme Court that sadly we can only dream about today, as a guarantor and protector of fundamental human rights and dignity, and of moral leadership in our country. But there are other important legacies, I think, that as lawyers we often forget about, but that I think are as important today as they were the day that Brown was decided. I'm speaking of the legacy of courageous and voluntary activists and ordinary people who put their lives on the line to hold America to its promise of equality. of tireless organizers who mobilize people to claim and demand their rights against daunting opposition, and a few committed lawmakers who are struggling to make sure that Brown remains the law of the land for all Americans. I can't think of a single American who better embodies those modern-day legacies of Brown than the Honorable John Lewis. For more than 30 years, Congressman Lewis has been at the vanguard of the struggle for human rights in the United States. In 1961, at the age of 21, he volunteered for the Freedom Rides to challenge segregation on interstate bus lines. He was attacked and severely beaten by a mob at one of the ride's first stops, a whites-only waiting room in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and he later served a month sentence in Mississippi's notorious Parchman Prison. At age 23, he was a founder and chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which spearheaded the sit-ins and direct nonviolent action across the South to make real the rights and justice that the law had long required. The same year, he helped to plan and was a keynote speaker at the March on Washington. I want to say this again. At age 23, he was a founder and coordinator, the chairman of SNCC, and a keynote speaker at the March on Washington. Those of us in our 30s and now 40s are thinking, what have we been doing with our lives? His speech at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial, and I urge you to read it, it's available online, is, I think, one of the nation's most eloquent demands for justice and equality now. With great foresight, he said of the Civil Rights Bill that was then languishing in Congress, "What is in the bill that will protect the homeless and starving people of this nation? What is there in this bill to ensure the equality of a maid who earns $5 a week in the home of a family whose income is $100,000 a year?" I think that demand for economic justice in American law is as relevant today as it ever was. In 1964, he coordinated SNCC's voter registration drives during the Mississippi Freedom Summer, registering thousands of African Americans in the heart of the violent, deep segregated South. And in 1965, he led 600 marchers over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, where Alabama state troopers set upon them with billy clubs wrapped in barbed wire and other weapons, and beat them brutally in an attack that would become known as Bloody Sunday, and that led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In the middle of a bunch of courageous people, said his colleague Julian Bond, he was the most courageous. Through that courage and leadership, I believe, John Lewis has breathed life into our Constitution in a way that no lawyer, no court, no judge could ever do, in a way that's real and lasting for all of us. And I think there's an important message in that for us as lawyers, which is to remember that the Constitution belongs to everyone, not only to people who have a law degree, that we as lawyers can't do it alone, and that in fact we never have, and that the people most affected by the denial of human rights are always going to be those at the forefront of enforcing it and who ultimately make the largest sacrifice for all of our rights. Congressman Lewis has not stepped back an inch from the bravery and commitment that he showed as a 21-year-old college student. He worked throughout the 1970s to register voters and protect their rights, among other things, and he became an Atlanta City Council member in 1981. He was elected to Congress in 1986. During his almost 2 decades in the House of Representatives, John Lewis has been an unrelenting champion for the human rights of all people and for the sanctity of the U.S. Constitution. He has opposed the death penalty. He's been a leader in addressing the rights of poor people, of women, of people of color. He has pushed for tougher environmental laws, and he has staunchly defended the Bill of Rights. In testifying against the proposed constitutional amendment banning gay marriage, Congressman Lewis said this: "We have been down this road before in this country. Separate is not equal. The right to liberty and happiness belong to each of us and on the same terms, without regard to either skin color or sexual orientation. Our rights as Americans do not depend on the approval of others or on the passion of the times. Our rights depend on us being Americans." This, to me, is the essence of the modern legacy of Brown versus Board of Education, and from one of its staunchest defenders. It's my great pleasure to introduce Congressman John Lewis.
Alan, thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. Let me start by saying, what an introduction. Thank you so much. You know, you can come down to Atlanta, come down to Georgia, and say those same words over and over again, and no one will ever run against me. Thank you so much. I'm very pleased, happy, and delighted to be here this afternoon. I must tell you, I have always had a profound respect and appreciation for lawyers. Throughout history of our country, lawyers have played an important and key role in bringing about change. So thank you for all that you do, members of the bar, members of the bench, and all of those of you who will become members of the bar and members of the bench. As lawyers, law students, and judges, you know a lot about our nation's legal system. You know all about motions, filing, and settlements. You know a great deal about the First Amendment. You know the difference between the U.S. Code and common law. But I bet you don't know anything about raising chickens. I noticed we had some chicken for lunch today. Now, I grew up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, near a little place called Troy. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But back in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, my father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. And on this land, we raised a lot of cotton, a lot of corn, a lot of peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. If you come and visit my congressional office of any member of Congress from the state of Georgia, the moment you walk in the door, the staff will offer you a Coca-Cola, because Atlanta is the home of the Coca-Cola Company, and Coca-Cola provides all members of the Georgia congressional delegation with an adequate supply of Coca-Cola products to be made available to our visitors. Every now and then, I may have a Diet Coke. The next thing the staff will offer you will be some peanuts, because in the state of Georgia, we raise a lot of peanuts. And the Georgia Peanut Commission provides us with peanuts. I don't eat too many of those peanuts. I ate so many peanuts when I was growing up in rural Alabama, I just don't want to see any more peanuts. Years ago, I would get on a flight and fly from Atlanta to Washington or Washington back to Atlanta, and the flight attendant tried to put some peanuts on me. And I said, no, thank you. I don't want any peanuts. Now, you heard me say on this farm in rural Alabama, we raise a lot of chickens. I know you're very smart. You're gifted. You're talented. But you don't know anything about raising chickens. Let me tell you what I had to do as a young child growing up in rural Alabama during the 40s and the 50s. It was my responsibility to care for the chickens. And I fell in love with raising chickens like no one else could raise chickens. What I had to do, I had to take the fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and wait for 3 long weeks for the little chicks to hatch. I know some smart judge, some smart lawyer in this room, St. John Lewis, or maybe some smart law professor, St. John Lewis. Why do you mark those fresh eggs with a pencil before you place them under the setting hen? Well, from time to time, another hen would get on that same nest. And there would be some more eggs. And you had to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. Do you follow me? You don't follow me. That's okay. When these little chicks would hatch, I would fool these setting hens. I would cheat on these setting hens. I would take these little chicks and give them to another hen. Or put them in a box with a lantern. Raise them on their own. Get some more fresh eggs. Mark them with a pencil. Place them under the setting hen. Encourage the setting hen to stay on the nest for another 3 weeks. I kept on fooling these setting hens and cheating on these setting hens. And when I look back on it, it was not the right thing to do. It was not the moral thing to do. It was not the most loving thing to do. It was not the most nonviolent thing to do. It was not the legal thing to do. But I kept on cheating on these setting hens because I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive hatcher from the Sizzle Roebuck store in Atlanta. We used to get the Sizzle Roebuck catalog. Most of you don't know anything about it. You're too young. But maybe your grandmother or grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather will know something about it. That big book, thick catalog, some people call it the ordering book. Others call it the wish book. I wish I had this. I wish I had that. So we're never able to save enough money. But as a young child, about 7.5, 8 years old, I wanted to be a minister. And one of my uncles had Santa Claus to bring me a Bible. And I learned to read the Bible. Then I started preaching or speaking a little. But with the help of my brothers and sisters and my fresh cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken house, in the chicken yard, like you would gather here in this room. And we would have church. My brothers and sisters and fresh cousins and the chicken would make up the congregation. And I would start speaking or preaching. And when I look back on it and think about it, some of these chicken would bow their heads. Some of these chicken would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But I'm convinced that some of these chickens that I preached to in the 40s and in the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. As a matter of fact, some of these chickens were a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. Well, that's enough of that story. Growing up there in rural Alabama during the 40s and the 50s, when we would visit the little town of Troy, or visit Montgomery, visit Birmingham or Tuskegee, I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women. I saw those signs that said white waiting, colored waiting. As a young child, I tasted the bitter fruits of segregation and racial discrimination, and I didn't like it. Ask my mother, ask my father, my grandparents and great-grandparents, why segregation? Why racial discrimination? And they would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in trouble. Don't get in the way. As a young child, 15 years old, in 1955, a little more than a year after Brown versed at the Board of Education, when I was 14 in the 9th grade, I heard about Rosa Parks. I heard Martin Luther King Jr. on the old radio, and the words of Dr. King, the action of Rosa Parks. The Supreme Court decision of 1954 inspired me to find a way to get in the way. I got in the way. I got in trouble. It was good trouble. It was necessary trouble. As members of the bar, as lawyers, as judges, you're united by a common bond. The law is part of you. The law is your tool, and you can use the law to make a difference. You can use the law to change the world. Here in Washington, here in America, and throughout the world, there is a need for all of us to continue to stand up and fight for social justice. We must continue to use the law as a tool to defend those without the means and the know-how to protect themselves. There is a need now more than ever before to protect citizens' rights under the law. The United States Constitution must be used as a mighty and powerful nonviolent weapon to protect all of our citizens from the intrusion of government, from the watchful eye of Big Brother. We have a right to privacy in America. We have a right to be left alone. The Constitution must protect our citizens from being spied on. In this rush to protect our nation, to protect our homeland, we must not ever give up on our basic rights as citizens, not just citizens of America, but citizens of the world. During the 60s, in order to gain our civil rights, we had to fight for our civil liberties. As attorneys, as judges, you have decided to answer this call for greater justice in America. You fight for the rights of the poor, the homeless, for individual rights, and for those who seek and thirst for justice. Throughout our history, lawyers have been called on to stand up, be courageous, be brave, and get in the way. You know, during the 60s, I got arrested a few times and went to jail about 40 times. Just think, a few short years ago, in the heart of the American South, in Alabama, in Georgia, in Mississippi, it was impossible for blacks and whites to share a taxi cab together, sit together in a restaurant, at a lunch counter, to ride together on a bus. Just think. Just a few short years ago, people could not register to vote simply because of the color of their skin. Pay a poll tax, pass a so-called literacy test, interpret certain section of the Constitution of Georgia, or Alabama, or Mississippi. We had to get in a way to bring that about, but we needed the support and the help of lawyers. Tell you a little story, and I won't bore you for long. In 1957, when I was 17 years old, I finished high school. I applied to attend a little college called Troy State College, now known as Troy University, about 10 miles from my home. Submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the school. So I wrote a letter to Martin Luther King Jr. and told Dr. King I needed his help. I wanted to attend Troy State College. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote me back, sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket, and invited me to come to Montgomery to visit with him. In the meantime, I'd been accepted at a little college in Nashville, Tennessee. Never forget it, an uncle of mine gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had. Gave me a Foot Locker. I put everything that I own in that Foot Locker, my books, my clothing, everything except those chickens, and went off to school to Nashville. Being there for a few weeks, I told one of my teachers that I've been in contact with Martin Luther King Jr. And this teacher, who was a friend of Dr. King, informed Martin Luther King Jr. that I was in school in Nashville. Dr. King got back in touch and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. On a Saturday morning in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, my father drove me to the Greyhound bus station. I boarded the bus, traveled the 50 miles from Troy to Montgomery. Arrived in downtown Montgomery at the Greyhound bus station. A young lawyer met me. Had never seen a lawyer before. A young man by the name of Fred Gray, who was the lawyer for Rosa Parks for Dr. King. Young black man who later became the head of the Alabama Bar Association, the first African American. Met me, picked me up, and drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy. Ushered me into the office of the church. And I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I spoke up and said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. I guess I didn't want there to be any mistake that I was the right person. And that was the beginning of my involvement in the civil rights movement. I was so inspired that I knew then that I had to be part of an effort to help bring about a nonviolent revolution in America under the rule of law. With our lawyers, with our people standing up and fighting for the Constitution and protecting the Constitution, we will not be where we are today. So I said to each and every one of you, continue to hang in there. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't give out. Don't get lost in a sea of despair. Keep your faith and keep your eyes on the prize. 40 years ago, this summer, 1964, 40 years ago, this Sunday, more than 1,000 young people went into the state of Mississippi as part of something called the Mississippi Summer Project. The state of Mississippi has a black voting age population of more than 450,000. But only about 16,000 blacks were registered to vote. People have been beaten, arrested, jailed, some shot and killed for attempting to register to vote. People were told they could not read or write well enough. They couldn't pass the so-called literacy test. On one occasion, there was a black man who had a PhD degree and he flunked the so-called literacy test. On another occasion, a man was asked to give a number of bubbles in a bar of soap. The three young men that I knew, Andy Goodman, Mickey Schwerner, white, James Straney, African American, went out to investigate the burning of a black church Sunday night, June 21st, 1964. These three young men, riding together in a car, black and white, exercising their constitutional rights, were arrested, taken to jail later that same Sunday night. The sheriff took them from jail, turned them over to the Klan, where they were beaten, shot, and killed. These three young men didn't die in Vietnam. They didn't die in the Middle East. They didn't die in Eastern Europe. They didn't die in Africa or Central or South America. They died right here in our own country, trying to help all of our citizens to become participants in the democratic process. And then you have people in 2004 saying we should forget about what happened in Florida in 2000. We said we must not and we cannot forget about it because people died for the right to vote, for the right of people to protect our Constitution. The civil rights movement was not a struggle against people, but a struggle for justice under the law. We were not fighting against Alabama Governor George Wallace, a Birmingham Police Commissioner Bull Connor, a Selma Sheriff Clark who beat us, fired tear gas at us, and trampled us with horses. We were fighting unjust laws, unfair customs, and traditions. Just think, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed on July 2nd, 1964 by President Johnson, after Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, he came back to America, had a meeting at the White House with President Johnson and said to the president in so many words, "We need a strong voting rights act." And President Johnson said to Dr. King, "We don't have the votes in the Congress to get a voting rights act passed." But Martin Luther King Jr. came back to the South, met with a group of us, and said we would write that act. And he made a decision to join us in Selma, Alabama. In Selma, Alabama, in 1965, only 2.1% of blacks of voting age were registered to vote. There was one county, Lowndes County, between Selma and Montgomery. The county was more than 80% African American, but there was not a single registered African American voter in the county. In Selma, you can only attempt to register on the first and third Mondays of each month. You have to go down to the courthouse, go up some stairs, get inside of a door, and get a copy of the so-called literacy test. And I remember like it was just yesterday, when it was my day to lead a group of elderly black men and women to the courthouse to attempt to pass the so-called literacy test. It was January the 18th, 1965. We get to the top of the steps, Sheriff Clark beat me on the steps, and he said, "John Lewis, you're not some agitator. You're the lowest form of humanity." At that time, I had all of my hair, and I was a few pounds lighter. I looked Sheriff Clark straight in the eye, and I said, "Sheriff, I may be an agitator, but I'm not an outsider. I grew up only 90 miles from here, and we're going to stay here until these people are allowed to register to vote." And he said, "You're under arrest." And they arrested me and took me to jail, along with a few other people. A few days later, Martin Luther King Jr. and others came to Selma. More than 300 people were arrested. Ministers, lawyers, doctors, teachers, housewives, farmers. We filled the city jail, the county jail, the city stockade. And then in a little town called Marion, Alabama, Perry County, about 30 miles from Selma, the home county of Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Ralph Abernathy, and the late Mrs. Andrew Young, Jean Young. A march for the right to vote. A confrontation occurred. A young man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot in the stomach by a state trooper. And a few days later, he died at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma. And because of what happened to him, we made a decision to exercise our constitutional right, to march in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion from Selma to Montgomery. On March 7, 1965, about 600 of us participated in a nonviolent workshop. Then we lined up in twos to walk from Selma to Montgomery. I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. In this backpack, I had 2 books, an apple, an orange, toothbrush, and toothpaste. I thought we were going to be arrested, that we were going to go to jail, so I wanted to have something to read, something to eat. And since I was going to be in close quarters with my friends, colleagues, and neighbors, I wanted to be able to brush my teeth. I was walking beside a young man from Dr. King's organization, Jose Williams. Started crossing the Alabama River, Edmund Pettus Bridge. Down below, we saw all of the water in the river. And Jose Williams said to me, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." I said, Jose, can you swim? And he said, no. I said, well, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump, and we're not going back. We're going to continue to walk. We came to the highest point on the bridge. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. And we continued to walk. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers. And a man identified himself and said, I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march, will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church. In less than a minute and a half, Major John Cloud said to the state troopers, troopers, advance. You saw these men putting on their gas masks, and they came toward us, beating us with nightsticks and bullwhips, trampling us with horses, releasing the tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick, had a concussion at the bridge. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. 39 years later, I don't recall how I made it across the bridge, back to that little church. But I do recall being back at the church that Sunday afternoon. The church was full. More than 2,000 people on the outside trying to get in to protest what had happened on the bridge. And someone asked me to say a few words, and I stood up and said something like, I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam. But can I send troops to Selma to protect people who only desires to register to vote? And the next thing I knew, I had been admitted to the Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma, Alabama. Early that Monday morning, Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Abernathy came by to visit me, and Dr. King said, don't worry, John. We will make it from Selma to Montgomery. The Voting Rights Act will be passed. Because of what happened in Selma on Bloody Sunday, there was a sense of righteous indignation all over America. There was demonstration at the White House, the Department of Justice, at American embassies abroad, in more than 80 cities in America, on college campuses. President Johnson spoke to the nation on March 15 to a joint session of the Congress. He started that speech off that night by saying, I speak tonight for the dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy. He went on to say, at times, history and fate meet in a single place in man unending search for freedom. So it was more than a century ago at Lexington and at Concord. So it was at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. He condemned the violence in Selma, introduced the Voting Rights Act, and over again he said, and we shall overcome. Because of the action of a federal judge, Judge Franklin Johnson, who said we had a right to march. Because the judges in the old Fifth Circuit Court, we have witnessed more than a nonviolent revolution here in America, and especially in the American South. And I said to you as lawyers, and especially you young lawyers, who will be the leaders of the 21st century, don't be afraid to get in the way. Don't be afraid to operate on your own compass and be moved by the dictates of your conscience. My generation got in the way. Another generation of lawyers got in the way. We didn't have an email address. We didn't have a fax machine. We didn't have a cellular telephone, but we had the Constitution. And the Constitution is the most powerful nonviolent weapon we have in this American democracy of ours, and we must use it. I'm going on some time. This is the last story. When I was growing up outside of Troy, Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, I have an aunt by the name of Seneva. And my aunt Seneva lived in what we call a shotgun house. She didn't have a green manicured lawn. She had a simple, plain dirt yard. And sometime at night, you can look up through the holes in the ceiling, in the tin roof, and count the stars. Whenever it rained like it did last night here in Washington, she would get a pail, a bucket, a tub, and catch the rainwater. From time to time, she'd walk out into the woods and take branches from a dogwood tree and tie these branches together and make a broom. And she called that broom the breast broom. And she would sweep this dirt yard very clean, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week, but especially on a Friday or Saturday, because she wanted the dirt yard to look very good during the weekend. I know as lawyers and judges, students, members of the bar and the bench, you don't know what a shotgun house is. But in a nonviolent sense, a shotgun house is an old house, one way in, one way out, where you can bounce a basketball through the front door and it will go straight out the back door. Or in the military sense, a shotgun house, old house, one way in, one way out, where you can fire a shotgun through the front door and the bullets will go straight through the back door. My Aunt Geneva lived in a shotgun house. But one Saturday afternoon, a group of my brothers and sisters and a few of my first cousins, about 12 or 15 of us young children, while playing in my Aunt Geneva dirt yard. And an unbelievable storm came up. The wind started blowing, the thunder started rolling, the lightning started flashing, and the rain started beating on the tin roof of this old shotgun house. My aunt became terrified. She started crying. She thought this old house was going to blow away. So she got all of us little children together and told us to hold hands. And as little children, we did as we were told. The wind continued to blow, the thunder continued to roll, the lightning continued to flash, and the rain continued to beat on the tin roof of this old shotgun house. And when one corner of this old house appeared to be lifted from the foundation, Mom had us to walk to that corner to try to hold the house down with our little bodies. When the other corner appeared to be lifted, Mom had us to walk to that side to try to hold the house down with our little bodies. We were little children walking with the wind. But we never left the house. As members of this great organization, the wind may blow, the thunder may roll, the lightning may flash, and the rain may beat on our old house. Call it the house of Washington. Call it the house of New York. Call it the house of California. Call it the house of Georgia. Call it the American house. Call it the American Constitution Society. Call it the World House. We all live in the same house. It doesn't matter whether we're black or white or Hispanic or Asian American or Native American. It doesn't matter whether we're straight or gay. We all live in the same house. Under our Constitution, we are one people, we are one family, we are one house. So as lawyers, you must do what you can as judges to hold the house together. So walk with the wind and let the spirit of the Constitution be your guide. Thank you very much.